Hello everyone, today's discussion is going to be very long. So before I begin, please like and subscribe to help our channel grow. Today's topic is about the importance of minimum grain per pound, and the reason why I want to cover this topic is because this is the number one headache that Bowyers and sellers face, which is the users are using arrows that are far too light, in fact below the minimum GPP that we require. As a result, the bows break. So I hope this video will actually prevent that. Okay, we hope that people are educated. Okay, people become educated, and let's prevent this kind of failure in the future. So what does grains per pound mean? Okay, grains per pound is often written as GPP, which is the short form, and it's a very simple math calculation. Basically, the arrow weight in grains divided by the bow poundage at full draw. Okay, very simple. So if you have the arrow weight in grams, no big deal. Just multiply it by 15.432, you get it in grains. Or if you're lazy, just type it in Google, it will translate for you, it will convert for you. Okay, whereas the bow poundage, this one is where a lot of people make a mistake. So if they bought a bow that, let's say the bow is rated at 40 pound and 28 inch, they just automatically assume that they are drawing 40 pounds. And this is not true, because if you're drawing less than 28 inch, you are getting less poundage. If you're drawing more than 28 inch, you're getting more poundage. A lot of beginners, when I try to explain this thing to them, they are confused. They're like, oh my god, really? It's actually common sense. Think about it. If you're not touching the bowstring, you think it's 40 pounds? No way, you're not even touching the string, it's 0 pounds. So the more you draw it, the more the poundage goes up, right? And if you pass 28, it's going to be higher poundage than what is written on, because it was rated, it was measured at 28. And of course, later I'm going to tell you that there are actually different ratings. Some people measure it differently. So you have to actually measure the weight at full draw. You don't just assume the poundage based on the poundage that's written on your bow, because especially if you have a long draw, this becomes a big problem, because you would probably underestimate if you were to use the rated poundage for your calculation. Okay, so let's dive into each of the components, the arrow weight and the bow poundage separately. The arrow weight. Okay, so these are the three things that are commonly misunderstood. A lot of people think that the point weight, the shaft spine, and the shaft GPI is important. Okay, a lot of people think that these are very important criteria for the arrows. But I'll tell you this, they are useless. Okay, this information here is useless, and I'm gonna give you some examples here to help you understand why I'm saying this. First, let's begin with point weight. A lot of people, they assume that I'm using a heavier point, therefore my arrow weight is sufficient. This is not true. I'm gonna show you some examples now. Okay, so I have two arrows here. Okay, two arrows here. This one here, the brown color one, is 100 grain arrow point. Okay, this is 100 grain arrow point. This one here is 215 grain arrow point. So you might wonder, oh wow, there's a huge difference. So this is 215, that's just 100 grain point. This must be the heavier arrow, you might think. No. Both of these are exactly 27 grams. They are identical in weight. So the point itself doesn't make the arrow heavier. I'm gonna pick another example. Okay, this is a quick one. So another one here. This one here, 240 grains point. This 165 grain point. Okay, which do you think is heavier? Again, both of these is identical in weight. Both are 32 grams. So again, just the arrow point alone tells you nothing. Just because you use a heavier arrow point, it does not mean your arrow weight is enough. Okay? It doesn't mean your arrow weight enough is from just using a heavier point. Okay? You have to remember that. The point itself does not tell the full story. Next, the shaft spine. Okay, this is another one. Let's see, should I pick? Okay, let's pick this one here. Okay, these two arrows are identical in weight. However, this one here is a 500 spine. This one here is a 400 spine. You might think that, wow, the stiffer arrow must be the heavier, but no, they are both 32 grams. Next one here. You see this arrow, it looks identical, right? It looks identical, just the knot is of different color. Both of these are 500 spine. Okay, both of these are 500 spine. However, this one here is 29 grams, this one here is 27 grams. So just because you use the correct spine or use a stiffer spine, it doesn't mean your arrow weight is enough. Because I've seen a lot of cases like this, where after the customer has already broken their bow, they come to me and they say, but I used the correct spine. So, you think by just using the correct spine, your arrow weight automatically, magically becomes correct. But the arrow spine and the arrow weight is independent of each other, like what I just showed. Another one, the shaft GPI or the grain per inch. Okay, the GPI is actually one of the number that one of the data or information that I hate the most, because a lot of people confuse this and that. They may assume that GPI is probably a typo or maybe a variation of the GPP, but it's not. It is completely different. The GPI stands for grain per inch, and that's grain per pound. The way they work is completely different. The shaft GPI is kind of like density. How dense is the shaft for every length? Something like that. Okay, it's just for simplicity's sake, so that you can calculate the shaft weight from knowing its length. But this alone, again, is useless. It's useless information. It's like if you buy a car and you ask, what is the density of steel? Or what is the density of rubber? Density of copper? Does it matter? It doesn't matter. Knowing the density of these items or these elements or these alloys or whatever materials, it doesn't tell you the weight of the car that you want to buy, right? And that's because the GPI alone tells nothing. It tells only a very small of the story, and it doesn't have the full picture. So let me show you some of the examples. Let's see, I'm gonna pick, okay. Yeah, this one is a good one. Both of these are 400 spine, and both of these are the same 8 grain per inch. But the arrow weight, this one here is 43 grams, 32 grams. Big difference there. But the same GPI. What else? This one here. This one here, 10.1 GPI. This one here, 10.3 GPI. Okay, so there's a small difference of 0.2 grains per inch, which over, let's say, a 30-inch length, that would give you like 6 grains. So it's marginal, right? But this one, 32 grams. This one here, 44 grams. Huge difference. So what I just showed you just now, the point is I'm trying to make here is these information alone by themselves are useless. Okay? You cannot assume the arrow is heavy enough just because you switch to a heavier point. You cannot assume the arrow weight is sufficient just because you use the right spine. And you cannot assume that if you use, let's say example, if I require a 10 grain per pound minimum, if you use a 10 grain per inch, you just assume it's going to be correct. No, they are not the same. Okay. Also, the grain per inch, one of the reasons why I really hate it, when customers come and ask, they want to buy arrows from me, and they ask me what's the GPI of the arrows. But the thing is this: the arrows I sell, they are completed arrows. So if I tell you the grain per inch, what kind of difference does it make? Does it make the arrow lighter? Does it make the arrow heavier? Does it make the arrow shoot better? No. Why do you want to know the grain per inch? I actually asked this to my customers, and they have absolutely no idea. I just asked it because I want to compare with another arrow. But the thing is, it's already completed. If you want to buy it, you buy it. If you don't want to buy it, you go away. Right? So knowing the grain per inch, does it help you with anything? No. The reason why people use this grain per inch is because they want to build their own arrows. So if you're not building your own arrows, you don't need to know the grain per inch. For people who build their own arrows, because they need to estimate, okay? Estimate, it's not even accurate, it's an estimate. They want to estimate the final weight of their arrows. So they need to calculate, okay, so if I plan to buy this shaft and I want to cut it at a certain length, what weight does the shaft contribute? And the knocks, the feathers, the inserts, the point, they calculate all these, and they want to get the arrow weight to be sufficient for their minimum grain per pound or more. So that's the real reason why people use the grain per inch. If you are buying completed arrows, okay, arrows that are completed, ready to deliver, just take it and go. Don't ask for grain per inch because it makes no difference. It doesn't help you with anything. The grain per inch only confuses you because a lot of people confuse between grain per inch and grain per pound. They are different, okay? They are different. Don't confuse them. One way I avoid confusion to my customers, I just don't tell them the grain per inch because they get confused between grain per inch and grain per pound. For the grain per pound calculation, the only thing that matters, okay, the one and only thing that matters is the final arrow weight when you put the arrow on the grain scale. Everything else don't matter. Okay, I don't care what point you use, what insert you use, what shaft length you have, what GPI you have, what feathers you have, what glue you use, what knocks you have, what kind of wrap you have. I don't care. You just put it on a grain scale, and that's the arrow weight that you have in grains. As simple as that. Okay, everything else don't matter. Because I've actually seen a lot of cases where people will just argue, but my arrow is only 1 gram less. 1 gram less than the minimum. What? So? You think that 1 gram less means it's sufficient? No. If it's less, it's less. Okay? So, for example, let's say you are a miner. Okay? You are a miner. And you are not at a legal age to buy tobacco. Okay? Tobacco. So you go to the tobacco seller, and for whatever reason, that guy sold you the tobacco that you want, but you are underage. Let's say the legal age is 18 and you are 17 years old, 11 months, and 29 days. Does it make it legal? No, right? Even though if it's just one day before you reach the age of 18, but it's still wrong. You can still get a fine for that. Okay, it doesn't matter if it's just 1 day difference, and that's true with the arrows grain per pound. So if it's under, it's under. Okay, as simple as that. You don't argue with the seller that it is 1 gram. It is just 2 grams lighter. It is just 3 grams lighter. What's the point when people tell you that the minimum is 10 grains per pound? You follow. You either use heavier than that or exactly at 10. Okay? Maybe maybe you can use just a tiny bit lighter. That's like within a certain tolerance. That's considered a tolerance. It's not supposed to use that, but it's within a certain tolerance. For example, like me, I would accept up to a 0.5 grain per pound tolerance. Okay, but anyway, use the correct grain per pound. There's no point once you broke the bowl and you say, oh, is this 3 grams too light? There's no point because it's really far too light. Okay, so because the grain per pound only accounts for the total arrow weight at the end of the day, that it also says that if you use a very short arrow like the Pyeongjeon, the Korean tiny baby arrows, with the tonga and the whatever overdraw device, the siper, whatever you use, those small tiny arrows is actually safe to use if you can make the arrow heavy enough to meet the minimum arrow weight. Okay, so again, in the end of the day, it doesn't matter. Everything else doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is when you put it on the grain scale, that is the weight that you need. Okay, everything else don't matter. Next, let's go look into the bowl poundage. Okay, the labeled poundage on your bowl is actually inaccurate. Okay, it's actually inaccurate. Most of the time, it's actually inaccurate. So you have to actually consider a certain margin of error when you look into when you calculate with the bowl poundage, and the difference can come from many areas. For example, the way that they are measured. Okay, I'm gonna show you some bowl here. In China, they measure differently, but the rest of the world, they measure from the back of the bowl here. At 28 inch, that's where they measure the poundage. But in China, they measure it differently. They measure it from the belly side of the bowl, here. So as a result, when you buy, let's say, this bowl here, okay, this bowl here, versus this bowl here, if they are both labeled at, let's say, 28 inch, 35 pound at 28 inch, what you will find is that when you pull it back, the poundage of these two bowls are different. And that's because there is a draw length difference equivalent to the width, to the depth of the grip. One is measured from here, the other measured from here. So there is that difference there. That would result in a difference in the poundage from what's rated. Another one, different draw length standards. So Korean bowls, for example, they are measured at 31 inch. But the rest of the world measure them at 28. And as a result, I actually get this a lot from Korean bowl users. They tend to overestimate their own ability. So let's say for example, they'll buy a 50-pound Korean bowl and they just somehow think that they are drawing 50 pounds. They're very confident with themselves. I'm so strong, I can draw 50 pounds. But then, okay, this is where the problem starts. When they decide to change to a different type of bowl, they're gonna try a different type of bowl. And they will go to the seller and say, I want a 50-pound bowl. Anything less than that is just too light. Of course, because it's a 50 pound at 31 inch. So when they buy a new bowl that's not a Korean bowl, and they tell the seller, I want a 50 pound. But now, because it's a different type of bowl, not a Korean bowl, it's rated at 28. So when the bowl seller show them a bowl that's 50 pound at 28, they will get a shock. So heavy, they can't draw it. Why? Because that 50 pound at 28 is now a 60 plus pound at 31. It is substantially heavier than the Korean bowl that they are using. So they'll get a surprise, an unpleasant surprise when they use a different kind of bowl. So you have to take those into account. Different way of measuring their draw length and different draw length that is being used. Another one, the production tolerance. So especially mass-produced bowls, from like Ali, AF, they usually will label their poundage to the nearest zeros of 5. What I mean is, like example, 25 pound, 30 pound, 35, 40, 45, 50 pounds. They're usually rated at those steps. But are you actually getting poundage that is what is written? It's actually no. So for example, a bow that is 38 pound, 39 pound, 40, 41, 42, they are all actually labeled as 40 pounds. Another one, let's say if you get 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, they're all labeled as 35 pounds. So what is written there may not be what you're actually getting. It could be higher. Okay, if it's lower, fine, you're underestimating, that's fine. You are overestimating. You're overestimating, so that's fine, meaning you have a margin of error. But if you are underestimating, you have a negative, you have no margin of error, so that can lead to problem. Also, environmental effects. I have a good example here. Okay, so this bow here, because it's a natural bow, wood and bamboo, wood here, bamboo here. This one, when it's made in China, the environment there is drier, lower humidity, lower temperature. But when it comes to Malaysia, my country, it's hotter, it's warmer here, and it's also more humid. As a result, when this was made, it's labeled here 34 pounds at 28, but when I get it and I measure it, it's like 27, 28 pounds at 28 inch. So that's why at my full draw of 30 inch, I only get 30 pounds, not what is written here. So environment can affect the bow's poundage. In this case, because I'm shipping from a colder climate to a hotter climate, but if a bow is made in a hotter environment and a hotter and more humid environment and then shipped to a drier and colder environment, poundage actually goes up. So you have to pay attention to this kind of differences. You have to put some margin of error when you do some calculation. Of course, the correct way is actually to use a bow scale, draw the string back, and measure the actual weight you're getting. That's the only correct way. So any other way of using calculation, they are just estimation. Okay, now the last one. Okay, this one here is Bowyer cheating, okay, to get a higher feet per second. So I have actually seen this case actually does actually exist. I'm not going to name that, but what happened is sometimes these bowyers, because they want to market and sell their bow, so what is better than to advertise a higher speed? Okay, if their bows are shooting at a higher speed than their peers, people will assume their bows are more efficient, must be a better bow. Therefore, bowyers do actually cheat. Okay, they do actually cheat, and different bowyers will cheat a different amount. Okay, I have seen them, so it's not. I'm not saying this just out of like a fantasy. It actually happens. Not gonna name them. So one of the reasons why they can do it is because of Weber's law. So Weber's law says that we can't feel a difference until there is a substantial difference. There's a certain proportion to it. So for example, if I have a 40-pound bow versus a 42-pound bow, if you try to draw it back, you may not feel any difference. You feel, oh, it feels like the same. Both of them feels the same. So in that case, bowyers could actually make the bow a little bit heavier, 2 pounds heavier. So he has a poundage advantage and get a higher feet per second without the user noticing any difference. They'll feel, oh, between two bows, both are labeled at 40 pounds, but the one is actually the faster one because it's actually cheating. So this one can actually be sometimes quite substantial. I've actually caught bowyers who label their poundage 4 pounds more than what is actually written. So like for a 40-pound bow, a 4 pounds is 10%. Okay, so of course when you shoot a 10% heavier poundage, the arrows are faster. So you feel like, wow, I bought this 40 pound from this guy and 40 pound from another guy, but this 40 pound is so much faster. It's 10% more energy because it's cheating. And this one actually has a negative consequence. So the reason why it's faster is because the poundage is actually higher. So what it means is that it is actually shooting at a lower grain per pound. So if you are shooting the minimum grain per pound for the other bow that's not cheating, when you use the same arrow on the bow that's cheating, you are actually using arrows that are below the minimum grain per pound. And as a result, you can expect that those bows that cheated, they have a higher rate of failure. So with that said, sometimes we may not have the tools to measure the poundage of the bow. So in that case, well, the closest and the best that you have is just to look at the bow's poundage, and then by linear, I forget the word, but by this math calculation, you can estimate, okay, you can estimate the poundage that you are drawing. You can use, for example, the way that I calculate, for every 1 additional inch above 28 inches of draw, on a large bow, I would increment by 5% because they tend to be smoother. On a shorter bow, I might use as high as 7%, an increase of 7% for every additional inch because they may stack. You can vary depending on the length of the bow. Whereas if it's shorter than 28, you can do similarly but in a negative way. So you multiply by a small number. So that's the for the estimation. So, but remember this, estimation is inaccurate. Okay, estimation is estimation. It's not accurate because there's a lot of factors I just said that can cause difference in what you actually get when you draw versus what you think you are drawing. So whenever you estimate, okay, give it some margin of error. Assume it's a little bit heavier. Okay, assume that the poundage is a little bit heavier, so that it is better that you overestimated your poundage, meaning you will end up using the arrow being a little bit too heavy. That's fine, it's safe for you, but don't underestimate. If you underestimate, you're going to be using arrows that are too light for your poundage.